I never thought I'd be the kind of man who would systematically document his wife's infidelity like a forensic accountant. But then again, I never thought Isabella would be the kind of woman who would use our joint credit card to fund a hotel room with her college boyfriend. Life has a way of reshaping us in ways we never expect. My name is Marcus Bennett, and this is the story of how I discovered my wife's affair through browser autocomplete suggestions, and what I did about it. It's not a story about forgiveness or reconciliation. It's about the methodical pursuit of justice through legal channels, and how sometimes the most devastating revenge is simply letting the truth unfold in its proper time and place. Isabella and I had what everyone called the perfect marriage. 12 years of what I thought was genuine partnership, built on shared ambitions and mutual respect. We were both successful. I'm a senior software architect at a major tech firm here in Chicago. She's a marketing director at a boutique agency downtown. Combined, we pulled in well into the six figures, owned a beautiful suburban home, traveled frequently, and maintained an active social life that was the envy of our friends. We had chosen not to have children. Isabella's decision, really. I'm career-focused, she'd say, whenever the topic came up at dinner parties. Maybe someday, but not now. I had accepted this, as I had accepted most of Isabella's preferences over the years. Looking back, I realize I had spent our entire marriage accommodating her choices while convincing myself it was compromise. Isabella was everything I thought I wanted in a partner. Charming at social gatherings, ambitious in her career, beautiful in a way that made other men glance twice when we entered restaurants. She had this natural grace that commanded attention, and I felt lucky to be the man who got to go home with her every night. I suppose if I'm being honest, there were always signs of her narcissistic tendencies, but they were wrapped in such an appealing package that I mistook them for confidence. The way she needed to be the center of attention at parties. How she'd subtly redirect conversations back to her achievements. The casual way she dismissed other people's problems as less significant than her own. But these traits were balanced by her genuine successes and her undeniable charisma. As for me, I've always been more of a background player. Methodical, detail-oriented, the kind of person who notices when numbers don't add up or when systems aren't functioning as designed. In my professional life, this served me well. I could spot inefficiencies and security vulnerabilities that others missed. In my personal life, I had learned to channel this analytical nature into trust. I trusted Isabella because I chose to, because our life together seemed to work so well on paper. That trust, it turned out, was my greatest vulnerability. The changes. The transformation began about 8 months before I discovered the truth, though I wouldn't recognize it as such until much later. It started with Isabella's promotion 6 months earlier, a significant step up that came with increased responsibilities and, naturally, longer hours. I'm going to need to put in more time at the office, she told me over dinner one evening in March. The new position requires face time with clients, and you know how this industry works. Relationships are everything. I supported her completely. Do whatever you need to do, I said. We're a team. Your success is our success. Looking back, I can trace the timeline with painful precision. Late March. Isabella started working late 2 nights a week. Early April, she joined a new gym. I need to manage stress better, she explained. Mid-April, a wardrobe upgrade that I attributed to her new status at work. New perfume in May, something more expensive than her usual choice. Each change in isolation seemed reasonable, even positive. Isabella was ascending in her career, taking better care of herself, presenting a more polished image. I was proud of her. When friends commented on how great she looked, how confident she seemed, I basked in reflected glory. You're so lucky to have a wife who keeps herself up like that, my colleague Jake told me at a company barbecue in June. My wife's been wearing the same yoga pants for 3 days. I laughed and agreed, but something in his tone made me uncomfortable. There was an undertone I couldn't quite identify. Was it envy? Or was it pity? Did he know something I didn't? The late nights became more frequent. "Client dinner," Isabella would text. "Don't wait up." Her phone, which had always been casually accessible, was now always placed face down on surfaces. She'd started taking it with her to the bathroom, claiming she needed to stay available for urgent client communications. Girls' nights began happening twice a week. Isabella had always been social, but this frequency was new. When I'd ask about her evening, I'd get vague responses. "Just the usual crowd, nothing exciting. You know how these things are, just decompressing from work stress." Our intimacy didn't disappear, but it became mechanical, scheduled around her increasingly complex calendar. "Sorry, babe, early client meeting tomorrow," became a frequent refrain. When we did connect physically, she seemed distracted, going through the motions rather than being present. Meanwhile, my own work was demanding more attention. I was leading a major system overhaul that required weekend effort, which meant I was often occupied when Isabella was having her mysterious social renaissance. In retrospect, I wonder if she'd been waiting for exactly this kind of opportunity, a period when I'd be too distracted to pay close attention to the changes in our routine. The red flags were there, but I explained them all away. This is what I mean about trust being a choice. I chose to trust her explanations because the alternative was too devastating to consider. I chose to believe that her increased attention to her appearance was professional ambition, that her late nights were career dedication, that her emotional distance was temporary stress. I chose to trust right up until the moment her laptop betrayed her. 30 seconds to devastation. October 15th. I remember the date because it was a Tuesday, and Tuesdays had become one of Isabella's regular late work nights. I was in my home office responding to an urgent email from a client about a security vulnerability we'd discovered when my desktop computer decided to install a critical update and restart itself. The email was time-sensitive. Our client needed confirmation that we could patch the vulnerability before their quarterly security audit the next morning. I could have waited 20 minutes for my computer to finish its update cycle, but Isabella's MacBook was sitting on the kitchen counter, as it had been dozens of times when I needed to quickly send an email or check something online. Isabella and I had always shared computer access. We trusted each other with passwords, bank accounts, everything. Her laptop was essentially the household shared computer for quick tasks. Over the past month alone, I'd borrowed it 5 times for exactly this purpose. Quick emails when my system was busy, checking our joint bank account, ordering groceries online. Isabella was never one to clear her browser history. She found it convenient that her frequently visited sites would autocomplete, that she didn't have to remember URLs or search for things she accessed regularly. This habit, which had always struck me as slightly careless from a digital security perspective, was about to become the instrument of revelation. I opened Safari and clicked on the address bar to type in my email provider's URL. The autocomplete drop-down appeared immediately, showing the most recent searches. My eye caught something that made no sense. Golden Motel, downtown Chicago. I stared at the suggestion for a moment, confused. We'd never stayed at any motel, golden or otherwise. Isabella was particular about accommodations. She preferred boutique hotels, places with thread counts worth mentioning. Why would she be searching for a motel? Curiosity overrode discretion. I typed H and watched new suggestions appear. Hotels near me. How to delete browser history. The second suggestion hit me like ice water. Isabella, who never cleared her browser history, had been researching how to delete it. I typed R with a growing sense of dread. Roman Castellano Facebook. Roman Castellano LinkedIn. Roman Castellano. I knew that name. Isabella's college boyfriend, the one she'd dated for 2 years before we met. The relationship had ended badly. He'd cheated on her with her roommate, a betrayal that had devastated her at the time. She'd told me the story early in our relationship, explaining why she'd been cautious about trusting men when we first started dating. He broke my heart, she'd said. Made me question everything I thought I knew about relationships. I swore I'd never let anyone have that kind of power over me again. The irony was not lost on me now. My hands were shaking as I continued my alphabetical investigation. Each letter revealed new searches that painted an increasingly clear picture. Travel websites, restaurant reservations at places we'd never been together, gift websites, social media platforms I knew Isabella rarely used, and hotels. So many hotel searches. My analytical mind kicked into high gear, overriding the emotional devastation that was trying to overwhelm me. I began taking screenshots, documenting each search with timestamps. If this was what I thought it was, I would need evidence. My professional training in digital forensics, usually applied to corporate security breaches, was now being deployed to investigate my own marriage. The search history painted a timeline that went back 4 months. 4 months of methodical planning, research, coordination. This wasn't a sudden lapse in judgment or a moment of weakness. This was a sustained campaign of deception. I sat in my kitchen, staring at Isabella's laptop screen, feeling my 12-year marriage dissolve in real time. The client email that had seemed so urgent 20 minutes earlier now felt absurdly insignificant. Everything felt insignificant except the growing pile of digital evidence that my wife was having an affair. I heard Isabella's car in the driveway. She was coming home from another late work night, and I had approximately 2 minutes to decide how to handle what I'd just discovered. My first instinct was confrontation, to meet her at the door with the laptop open, to demand explanations, to release the rage and hurt that was building in my chest. But something stopped me. Maybe it was my analytical nature, or maybe it was a survival instinct, but I realized that confrontation right now would be counterproductive. Isabella was still living a lie, which meant she would probably continue to lie when confronted. If I wanted the truth, the whole truth, I needed more than autocomplete suggestions. I quickly sent my urgent work email from Isabella's laptop, then closed the browser and returned the laptop to its original position. When Isabella walked through the door 5 minutes later, I was back in my office, apparently focused on my restored computer. "How was your evening?" I called out, my voice sounding surprisingly normal. "Oh, typical client dinner. Boring conversation about market positioning and brand strategy. I'm exhausted." Every word felt like a knife, but I maintained my casual tone. "Grab anything good to eat?" "That new Italian place on North Wells. The pasta was decent, but overpriced. How was your evening? Get that client issue resolved." Eventually, technology is wonderful until it isn't. She laughed, and the sound was like glass breaking. This was the woman I'd shared my life with for 12 years, lying to my face with casual expertise. How long had she been this good at deception? Had our entire marriage been built on carefully constructed fictions? That night, I lay awake next to Isabella, listening to her breathe, wondering if she was dreaming about Roman Castellano. My mind was racing, constructing plans, analyzing options, calculating the best path forward. The man who had gone to sleep the night before was gone, replaced by someone harder, more strategic. The alphabet of betrayal had spelled out my wife's infidelity, but it had also revealed something about myself I didn't know existed. A capacity for methodical revenge that was as precise as it was ruthless. The deep dive. The next morning, Isabella left for work as usual, kissing me goodbye with the same casual affection she'd shown for months. I waited until I heard her car leave the driveway, then returned to her laptop with the methodical approach I usually reserve for debugging complex software problems. I had approximately 8 hours before Isabella returned home. 8 hours to conduct a thorough investigation and document everything I found. My professional background had taught me the importance of maintaining chain of custody for digital evidence, so I approached this systematically. First, I created a secure folder on my own computer and began taking comprehensive screenshots of Isabella's browser history, search patterns, and saved bookmarks. Each screenshot was time-stamped and saved with metadata that would prove when the evidence was collected. The Roman Castellano research revealed a timeline that was brutally clear. 5 months ago, Roman had moved back to Chicago after his divorce was finalized. His LinkedIn profile showed he'd taken a job with a company that did vendor work with several major Chicago marketing firms. His Facebook profile, which Isabella had obviously been stalking, showed him posting photos from Chicago restaurants, galleries, and events. Cross-referencing Roman's social media posts with Isabella's browser history created a pattern that was impossible to ignore. When Roman posted about trying a new restaurant, Isabella would search for that restaurant within days. When he checked into a hotel for what appeared to be business travel, Isabella would research hotels in the same area. She had been following his digital breadcrumbs like a lovesick teenager. The affair had begun the week after Roman's return to Chicago. Isabella's searches shifted from passive stalking to active coordination. Hotel bookings, restaurant reservations, gift purchases. And everything was being charged to our joint credit card accounts. This detail infuriated me more than the emotional betrayal. It was one thing to have an affair, it was another to fund it with my money. I began calculating the financial impact, tracking expenses that I now realized were directly related to Isabella's relationship with Roman. Hotel charges that had been explained as client meetings in upscale locations. Restaurant bills that were supposedly networking dinners. Gift purchases from jewelry stores and men's clothing retailers that had been categorized as business expenses when Isabella used our joint cards. The total was staggering, over $8,000 in the past 4 months. $8,000 of our marital assets had been used to fund my wife's affair. In Illinois, this would constitute dissipation of marital assets, a legal concept I researched extensively that afternoon. But the financial betrayal, as maddening as it was, paled in comparison to the emotional manipulation I was uncovering. Isabella's calendar, synchronized with her laptop, told a different story than the one she'd been sharing with me. Client dinners corresponded with Roman's social media posts from the same restaurants. Girls' nights happened on evenings when Roman posted photos from events around the city. Late work meetings coincided with hotel charges to our credit card. The level of deception was breathtaking. Isabella hadn't just been unfaithful. She'd been running a sophisticated campaign of lies that required planning, coordination, and a complete disregard for my well-being. Every, "Sorry, babe, early meeting tomorrow," had been cover for time spent with another man. Every, "You know how these work things are," had been a calculated misdirection. As the day progressed, my emotional state evolved from hurt to anger to something colder and more focused. Isabella had made choices, methodical, deliberate choices to betray our marriage and steal from our joint finances to fund her affair. These weren't impulsive mistakes. They were calculated actions that deserved calculated consequences. I began researching divorce law in Illinois, asset protection strategies, and private investigation services. If Isabella wanted to play games with our marriage and our finances, I would play by the rules that offered me the best chance of protecting myself and ensuring appropriate consequences for her actions. By the time I heard Isabella's car in the driveway that evening, I had assembled a comprehensive digital dossier of her affair, researched my legal options, and begun formulating a strategic response. The man she came home to looked the same as the man she'd left that morning, but internally, I had transformed from trusting husband to methodical adversary. "How was your day?" Isabella asked, settling onto the couch next to me as I pretended to watch television. "Productive," I replied. "Very productive. How about yours?" "Oh, the usual chaos. I've got another late meeting tomorrow night. This new client is very demanding about FaceTime." I nodded sympathetically, while internally noting that Roman had posted earlier that day about trying a new wine bar tomorrow evening. The correlation was so predictable it was almost insulting. That's dedication, I said. I hope they appreciate how hard you're working for them. I think they do. This account could be huge for the firm if I handle it right. She was lying so casually, so effortlessly, that I wondered how long she'd been this skilled at deception. Had she always been capable of this level of manipulation? Or was this a new skill she'd developed specifically for managing her affair? Speaking of work, I said carefully, do you remember Roman Castellano from college? I was thinking about him the other day for some reason. The micro-expression that crossed Isabella's face lasted less than a second, but I caught it. A brief widening of her eyes, a barely perceptible tension in her jaw. She recovered quickly, but not quickly enough. Roman. Wow, that's a name I haven't heard in years. Why were you thinking about him? I don't know, something triggered the memory. Didn't he move to Seattle after college? I have no idea. We haven't kept in touch. You know how college relationships end. You move on with your life. Another lie, delivered with convincing casualness. But I had seen her reaction, and it had confirmed everything I needed to know. Isabella was not just having an affair, she was willing to lie directly to my face about it without hesitation. That night, as Isabella slept peacefully beside me, I finalized my decision. There would be no counseling, no attempts at reconciliation, no dramatic confrontations that would give her opportunities to manipulate or gaslight me. Isabella had chosen deception and betrayal. I would choose strategic legal action and methodical documentation. She had written the alphabet of betrayal, but I would write the epilogue. Professional help. Victoria Cross came highly recommended from 3 different online reviews and had specialized in marital investigations for over 15 years. Her office in downtown Chicago was professional, but unremarkable. The kind of place that wouldn't attract attention if someone happened to see you entering the building. I've reviewed the documentation you sent, Victoria said, sliding a folder across her desk. Your digital evidence is comprehensive and well organized. You have a strong foundation, but we need photographic evidence to supplement the financial and digital proof. I had contacted Victoria 3 days after my discovery, sending her encrypted files containing screenshots of Isabella's browser history, credit card statements, and a timeline of suspicious activities. Victoria had been impressed with the thoroughness of my documentation. Apparently, most clients came to her with suspicions and feelings rather than hard evidence. What exactly are you looking for? I asked. Photographs and video of your wife with this Roman individual in public spaces. Illinois is an all-party consent state for recording, so we can't capture private conversations, but we can document public meetings, hotel arrivals and departures, restaurant visits, anything that happens in public view. Victoria explained the legal boundaries carefully. Private investigators in Illinois could conduct surveillance in public spaces, but they couldn't trespass, hack into digital accounts, or record private conversations without consent from all parties. What they could do was document patterns of behavior that would support claims in divorce proceedings. Based on your wife's pattern, she meets with Mr. Castellano every Tuesday and Thursday evening. I'll position surveillance teams at the locations you've identified. The hotels she's been charging to your joint accounts, the restaurants that match his social media posts. We'll maintain visual contact and document their interactions. How long will this take? 2 weeks should be sufficient to establish a clear pattern. I'll provide you with date-stamped photographs, video footage where appropriate, and a detailed log of all surveillance activities. Everything will be properly documented to maintain chain of custody for potential legal proceedings. Victoria also recommended that I begin protecting our marital assets. Start documenting everything. Bank statements, investment accounts, real estate holdings, debts. If your wife has been using marital funds for this affair, you may be able to pursue a dissipation claim in the divorce proceedings. I spent the following week creating a comprehensive inventory of our financial situation. 12 years of marriage had resulted in substantial shared assets. Our home, worth approximately $400,000 with $200,000 remaining on the mortgage. Joint investment accounts totaling nearly $300,000. 2 cars, both financed, and various smaller accounts and possessions. More importantly, I documented the pattern of affair-related expenses, hotel charges that Isabella had explained as client meetings, restaurant bills that supposedly represented networking dinners, gifts purchased from jewelry stores and clothing retailers, travel expenses to places we'd never been together. The total was now approaching $10,000 in just 4 months. During this period, Isabella continued her routine of Tuesday and Thursday late work meetings, along with occasional weekend girls' nights. Her behavior toward me remained affectionate but distant, the same pattern that had been developing for months. She seemed comfortable with her double life, confident that her lies were maintaining the necessary separation between her affair and our marriage. "You seem distracted lately," she mentioned one evening as we sat in our living room, both supposedly focused on our respective laptops. "Big project at work," I replied. "You know how it is when everything has to be perfect." "I do know. I've been dealing with the same pressures with this new client. It's exhausting having to be on all the time." The irony was extraordinary. Isabella was complaining about the exhaustion of maintaining a false persona while sitting 3 feet away from the husband she'd been systematically deceiving for 4 months. The cognitive dissonance required to maintain this level of deception was staggering. "Well, hopefully we'll both get through our demanding period soon," I said. "Hopefully," she agreed, not realizing that my demanding period was specifically focused on documenting her betrayal with legal precision. A week and a half into Victoria's surveillance, she called with an update. "The pattern is even more consistent than your research suggested," she reported. "Every Tuesday and Thursday, your wife meets Mr. Castellano at the same wine bar downtown. Then they proceed to either the Golden Motel or the Fairfield Inn. We have extensive photographic documentation of their public interactions, hand-holding, kissing, clearly romantic behavior. And this will hold up in court?" "Absolutely. All surveillance was conducted in public spaces with proper documentation. The photographs are time-stamped and GPS tagged. I'll provide you with a complete evidence package that any divorce attorney will find compelling." "How much longer do you need?" 3 more surveillance sessions should complete the documentation, but I'd recommend you start consulting with a divorce attorney now. Based on the evidence we're collecting, you'll have a strong case for asset protection and financial recovery. That evening, Isabella came home from another client dinner with slightly smeared lipstick and a story about how exhausting it was to manage demanding clients. "You look tired," I observed. "It's been a long day. I think I'm going to take a bath and go to bed early." "Good idea. You deserve some rest." As I watched her head upstairs, I reflected on how completely our marriage had become a performance. Isabella was performing the role of devoted wife while conducting an affair. I was performing the role of oblivious husband while systematically documenting her betrayal. The only difference was that my performance had an end date, and hers was about to be canceled mid-run. Evidence and strategy. Victoria's final surveillance report was devastating in its thoroughness. 43 photographs documenting Isabella and Roman's affair across 8 separate meetings. Time-stamped images of them entering and leaving hotels. GPS-tagged photos of romantic dinners. Video footage of public displays of affection that left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. "Your wife and Mr. Castellano have maintained a remarkably consistent schedule," Victoria explained as she walked me through the evidence package. "Every Tuesday and Thursday evening, without exception, they meet at Vino Bianco Wine Bar at 6:30 p.m., then proceed to either the Golden Motel or the Fairfield Inn by 8 p.m. They typically emerge 2 hours later." The methodical nature of their affair was almost insulting. Isabella had reduced her betrayal of our marriage to a calendar entry, a recurring appointment that fit neatly between her other commitments. There was no passion or romance in this arrangement, just scheduled infidelity with the efficiency of a business meeting. I've also documented the financial aspects, Victoria continued, handing me a folder thick with receipts and credit card statements. Every hotel charge matches the dates of their meetings. The restaurant bills correspond to their dinner patterns. Even some of the gift purchases can be traced to timing that suggests they were purchased for Mr. Castellano. The financial documentation was particularly galling. Isabella had been using our joint credit card to pay for hotel rooms where she conducted her affair. She had charged romantic dinners with her lover to accounts that I helped fund. The audacity was breathtaking. She wasn't just betraying our marriage, she was billing the betrayal to our shared resources. Armed with Victoria's evidence package, I scheduled consultations with 3 divorce attorneys. I needed someone who understood both the emotional and financial complexities of adultery cases in Illinois. Someone who could help me navigate the legal system strategically rather than emotionally. The attorney I ultimately chose was Sarah Baker, a partner at a downtown firm who specialized in high-asset divorces involving marital misconduct. Sarah reviewed my evidence package with the same methodical approach I had used to assemble it. "This is exceptionally well documented," Sarah said, spreading photographs and financial records across her conference table. "Most clients come to me with suspicions and emotions. You've brought me a comprehensive case file. What are my options?" Illinois is a no-fault divorce state, so the adultery itself won't affect the basic divorce proceedings. However, the financial evidence you've collected supports a strong dissipation claim. Your wife used marital assets to fund her affair, and Illinois courts take that seriously. Sarah explained that dissipation of marital assets occurs when one spouse uses marital funds for purposes unrelated to the marriage and against the other spouse's interests. Isabella's use of our joint accounts to fund her affair clearly qualified. Based on your documentation, you can seek reimbursement for the affair-related expenses, plus potentially use the dissipation as leverage in asset division. If we can prove she spent $10,000 of marital funds on her affair, that amount should be credited back to you in the final settlement. What about timing? How long will this take? Illinois has a mandatory 6-month waiting period for no-fault divorces. We'll file the petition citing irreconcilable differences, along with the dissipation claim. Given the strength of your evidence, I expect your wife's attorney will encourage settlement rather than litigation. Sarah recommended that I begin taking steps to protect our assets before serving Isabella with divorce papers. Open individual bank accounts and redirect your direct deposit. Document all marital property, real estate, investments, personal property. Make sure you have copies of all financial records. And when should I confront her? I'd recommend serving the papers rather than having a confrontation. Emotional confrontations rarely provide useful information, and they often give the other spouse time to hide assets or coordinate stories. A formal legal process keeps everything documented and admissible. I spent the following week implementing Sarah's recommendations. I opened an individual checking account and redirected my direct deposit. I created comprehensive inventories of our shared property, documenting everything from our house to our kitchen appliances. I copied financial records, insurance policies, investment statements, and tax returns. Isabella noticed none of these preparations. She was too focused on managing her affair schedule to pay attention to my activities during the day. Her Tuesday and Thursday absences continued like clockwork, along with her increasingly elaborate explanations for where she'd been and what she'd done. "This client is so demanding," she complained one Thursday evening, returning home with the same slightly disheveled appearance that had become her standard post-affair look. "They want FaceTime constantly. I'm exhausted." "You've been working really hard," I agreed. "Maybe you should take some time off soon." "I wish I could, but this is such a critical time for the account. I can't afford to back off now." She was right that it was a critical time, but not for the reasons she imagined. I was 2 weeks away from serving her with divorce papers, and she was completely unaware that her carefully constructed double life was about to collapse. The most surreal aspect of this period was maintaining our normal routine while knowing it was all about to end. We had dinner together, watched television, discussed weekend plans, even maintained physical intimacy, all while I was systematically preparing to dismantle our marriage through legal channels. Isabella seemed completely comfortable with this arrangement. She could lie to my face about client dinners while still asking me to help her choose outfits for her work meetings. She could use our joint credit card to pay for hotel rooms with her lover, then come home and discuss our budget for the upcoming holidays. The cognitive dissonance required to maintain this level of deception was staggering, but Isabella seemed to navigate it effortlessly. She had compartmentalized her life so completely that she could be a loving wife at home and an adulterous partner outside it, without any apparent internal conflict. But compartmentalization works both ways. While Isabella was living her double life with casual confidence, I was quietly constructing a legal case that would expose every aspect of her deception with methodical precision. She thought she was managing her secret successfully, but she was actually creating evidence that would destroy her in court. The alphabet of betrayal had spelled out her infidelity, but the documentation I was assembling would spell out her financial and legal reckoning. The final test. 3 weeks before I planned to serve Isabella with divorce papers, I decided to conduct one final test of her deception. The evidence was already overwhelming, but I wanted to see just how far she would go to maintain her lies. I was thinking we should take a long weekend getaway, I suggested over breakfast on a Saturday morning. Maybe that resort in Wisconsin you mentioned last year? We haven't had a real vacation in months. Isabella looked up from her coffee with an expression I couldn't quite read. That sounds wonderful, but the timing is terrible. This client situation is so intense right now. I can't afford to be away from the office for more than a day. What about the weekend after next? Just 2 nights? Let me check my calendar, she said, reaching for her phone. I watched her scroll through what I knew was a schedule that included regular meetings with Roman Castellano. That weekend is completely booked. I have a major client presentation the following Monday, and I'll need the weekend to prepare. Okay, what if I just pick a place and surprise you? Maybe somewhere romantic, somewhere we've never been before? Isabella's eyes widened slightly, the same micro-expression I'd learned to recognize when she was calculating lies. You know I hate surprises when work is this crazy. Can we table this until things calm down? I smiled and nodded agreeably. Of course. I just thought it might be nice to reconnect. It would be nice. Once this client situation stabilizes, we should definitely plan something. That afternoon, I called Victoria and asked her to monitor a specific luxury resort about 2 hours north of Chicago, the same resort I had suggested to Isabella that morning. I also had her track Isabella's credit card usage over the weekend. Sunday evening, Victoria called with her report. Your wife and Mr. Castellano checked into the lakefront resort at 3:30 p.m. yesterday. They used the joint credit card registered in your wife's name. I have photographs of them arriving together, checking in, and leaving this morning. The audacity was breathtaking. Isabella had rejected my suggestion for a romantic weekend getaway, claiming work pressures and scheduling conflicts, then immediately used our joint credit card to book the exact same resort for herself and her lover. She had taken my romantic gesture and turned it into an opportunity for her affair. How much did they charge to our account? I asked. $1,200 for the suite, plus another $400 in resort charges, spa services, room service, activities, all charged to your joint Visa card. $1,600 for a romantic weekend getaway that I had suggested, she had rejected, and they had enjoyed together using my money. The symbolism was so perfect it was almost literary. Isabella had literally taken the romantic gestures I wanted to share with her and given them to another man, billing the experience to our joint account. When Isabella came home that Sunday evening, she appeared relaxed and happy in a way I hadn't seen in months. She looked like a woman who had just returned from a romantic weekend getaway, which of course she had. How was your weekend? I asked. Get a lot of work done? Exhausting but productive. I spent most of it at the office working on this presentation, but I think it's going to be worth it. This could be a huge account for us." She was lying so casually, so effortlessly, that I wondered if she even remembered what the truth was anymore. Isabella had just spent a romantic weekend at a luxury resort with her lover, using our money, and she was describing it as working at the office on a presentation. "You do look relaxed," I observed. "Like the work was good for you." "Sometimes you have to really focus to get things done right. No distractions, just pure concentration." I nodded thoughtfully. I'm sure Roman would appreciate that kind of dedication. The words slipped out before I could stop them. A small crack in my carefully maintained facade. Isabella's head snapped up, her expression suddenly alert. "Roman? Why did you mention Roman?" I recovered quickly. "Sorry, I meant your client. I think you mentioned the client contact's name was Roman something. Was I wrong?" Isabella stared at me for a long moment, clearly trying to determine if my mention of Roman was coincidental or intentional. I maintained an expression of mild confusion, as if I couldn't understand why she was reacting so strongly to a simple mistake. "No, the client contact is Roger," she said slowly. "Roger Patterson. I don't know why you thought Roman." "My mistake. You know how I am with names." Isabella relaxed slightly, but I could see her mind working, replaying our conversation to determine if there were any other slips or inconsistencies she needed to address. The paranoia of deception was starting to show. She was beginning to realize how many lies she had to track, how many details she had to keep straight. That night, I made my final decision about timing. Isabella's weekend getaway with Roman, funded by our joint account, would be the capstone of my evidence package. Sarah Baker could file the divorce papers the following week. Isabella had written the final chapter of her own betrayal by taking the romantic weekend I had offered her and giving it to another man. The alphabet of betrayal was complete, and it was time to begin writing the epilogue. The reckoning. I served Isabella with divorce papers on a Tuesday morning, exactly 8 weeks after discovering her affair through her laptop's autocomplete function. The timing was symbolic. Tuesday was one of her regular meeting days with Roman, and I wanted her to receive the papers while she was still planning her evening's deception. I had considered various dramatic approaches, confronting her with printed photographs of her affair, waiting in our living room with all the evidence displayed, orchestrating some kind of public exposure. But Sarah Baker had convinced me that legal precision was more effective than emotional theater. "Let the evidence speak for itself," Sarah had advised. "Divorce papers with a comprehensive dissipation claim will be more devastating than any confrontation you could arrange." The process server arrived at Isabella's office at 2:30 p.m., delivering a package containing the divorce petition, the dissipation claim, and a preliminary injunction freezing our joint assets. Attached to the legal documents was a summary of evidence that included financial records, surveillance photographs, and a timeline of her affair that was accurate to the day. Isabella called me at 4:15 p.m. "Marcus, what the hell is this?" Her voice was shaking, whether from anger, fear, or shock, I couldn't tell. "Divorce papers," I replied calmly. "I think they're fairly self-explanatory." "These photographs, when did you... I've been investigating your affair for 8 weeks, since October 15th to be precise. The night you left your browser history open and I discovered your searches for Roman Castellano." There was a long silence. I could hear Isabella breathing heavily, probably staring at photographs of herself and Roman that she never knew were being taken. "Marcus, we need to talk. This is all a misunderstanding. I can explain everything." "There's nothing to explain. You've been having an affair with Roman Castellano for 4 months. You've been using our joint credit cards to fund hotel rooms, romantic dinners, and gifts. You lied to me consistently and systematically. The evidence is comprehensive and legally documented. But we can work through this. People make mistakes. I made a mistake, but it doesn't have to end our marriage." The word mistake triggered something cold and final in my chest. A mistake is forgetting to buy milk or missing an anniversary. Isabella had conducted a 4-month affair that required extensive planning, coordination, and financial fraud. This wasn't a mistake. It was a campaign. Isabella, you spent our weekend getaway money on a romantic resort trip with your lover. You used our joint credit card to pay for hotel rooms where you conducted your affair. You lied to my face for 4 months about where you were and what you were doing. These weren't mistakes. They were choices. I'll end it immediately. I'll never see him again. We can go to counseling. We can work through this. The time for counseling was before you decided to have an affair, not after you got caught. The divorce petition is filed. The assets are frozen. You need to get an attorney. Marcus, please. 12 years of marriage has to count for something. It did count for something. It counted for me trusting you completely while you systematically betrayed that trust. It counted for me working to build our shared life while you spent our shared money on another man. Those 12 years are exactly why this is unforgivable. Isabella was crying now. I could hear it in her voice. But I felt nothing except a cold satisfaction that justice was finally being served with legal precision. What happens now? She asked. Now you deal with the consequences of your choices. You get an attorney, you respond to the legal papers, and you negotiate a settlement that compensates me for the marital assets you stole to fund your affair. This is so cold, Marcus. This isn't like you. You're right. The Marcus you knew was trusting and accommodating. The Marcus you're dealing with now is the one you created by lying to him for 4 months. You wanted to know what I'm like when I'm betrayed? You're finding out. I hung up before she could respond. My hands were steady, my breathing was calm, and I felt more focused than I had in months. Isabella's world was collapsing, but mine was finally coming into clear focus. Isabella came home that evening to find that I had changed the locks, a legally permissible action since both our names were on the deed. I had left her clothing and personal items in suitcases by the front door, along with a note directing her to contact my attorney for any further communication. She rang the doorbell repeatedly, then called my phone, then texted. I ignored all attempts at communication. The time for conversation had ended the moment she chose to book a romantic weekend with her lover using our money. Through the window, I watched Isabella load her suitcases into her car and drive away. I felt no sadness, no regret, no impulse to reconsider. I felt the calm satisfaction of a complex problem that had been solved through methodical analysis and strategic action. The alphabet of betrayal had ended with Isabella's departure, but the legal epilogue was just beginning. Legal consequences. Isabella's attorney contacted Sarah Baker within 48 hours of the service. The evidence package we had assembled was apparently so comprehensive that Isabella's legal counsel immediately recommended settlement negotiations rather than litigation. Mrs. Bennett's attorney acknowledges the validity of your dissipation claim, Sarah reported during our phone conference. They're requesting a meeting to discuss terms rather than proceeding to discovery. They clearly want to avoid having this evidence presented in open court. The dissipation claim was indeed devastating. Sarah had calculated that Isabella had spent $1,400 in marital funds on her affair. Hotel charges, restaurant bills, gifts, travel expenses, and the resort weekend that she had taken with Roman, using the romantic getaway money I had offered her. In Illinois, dissipation claims typically result in dollar-for-dollar reimbursement, Sarah explained. Your wife will have to compensate you for the full amount she spent on the affair. Plus, we can use the dissipation as leverage in the overall asset division. But the financial recovery was only part of the legal strategy. Sarah had also filed for temporary spousal support termination and a preliminary injunction that froze all joint assets until the divorce was finalized. Your wife can't access your joint accounts, can't modify your shared investments, can't take out loans against your home equity. Every financial move has to be approved by the court or agreed to by both parties. The asset freeze had an immediate impact on Isabella's lifestyle. She had been living in a hotel since I changed the locks, funding her temporary housing with credit cards that were now approaching their limits. Without access to our joint accounts, she was suddenly responsible for her own expenses with only her individual income. More significantly, the asset freeze meant that Isabella couldn't continue funding her relationship with Roman. The hotels, expensive dinners, and gifts that had characterized their affair were now financially impossible for her to maintain. Within a week of the divorce filing, Roman's social media activity told a revealing story. His posts shifted from upscale Chicago restaurants and hotels to generic bars and casual dining. The expensive lifestyle that Isabella had been subsidizing with our marital funds was clearly no longer sustainable. 2 weeks after I served the papers, Victoria called with an interesting update. "I've been monitoring the situation as you requested," she reported. "Mr. Castellano appears to be distancing himself from your wife. They've met only once since the divorce filing, and that meeting lasted less than an hour. What about their regular Tuesday and Thursday schedule? Completely abandoned. It appears that without access to marital funds for hotels and entertainment, the relationship has lost much of its appeal for Mr. Castellano." The irony was perfect. Roman had been attracted to Isabella partly because she could fund an expensive lifestyle that he couldn't afford on his own. When the money disappeared, so did his interest in maintaining the relationship that had destroyed my marriage. Meanwhile, Isabella was discovering that conducting an affair while going through divorce proceedings had professional implications she hadn't anticipated. Her company's HR department had received an anonymous complaint about potential conflicts of interest related to vendor relationships. I wasn't the source of this complaint. I had maintained strict boundaries about not directly sabotaging Isabella's career. But someone at her firm had apparently noticed her relationship with Roman, who did vendor work with several Chicago marketing agencies, including Isabella's. Sarah received a call from Isabella's attorney requesting an expedited settlement conference. "They want to resolve this quickly and quietly," Sarah reported. "Mrs. Bennett is apparently facing professional complications related to the affair, and she wants to minimize further exposure." What are they offering? Full reimbursement for the dissipation claim, plus a favorable asset division that essentially gives you the house in exchange for assuming the mortgage. They're also agreeing to waive any claim to spousal support. The settlement offer was more generous than I had expected. Isabella was apparently so eager to end the legal proceedings and minimize further exposure that she was willing to accept terms that were clearly disadvantageous to her. "She's basically paying you $1,100 to compensate for the affair expenses, giving you the house, and walking away with reduced assets and no ongoing financial support," Sarah summarized. "It's a very favorable outcome for you." I accepted the settlement. The legal process had achieved everything I had hoped for. Financial compensation for Isabella's theft of marital assets, a favorable division of our shared property, and a clean break that left me in control of our home and most of our accumulated wealth. More importantly, the legal proceedings had exposed Isabella's deception with methodical precision. Every lie she had told, every dollar she had stolen, every romantic gesture she had given to another man had been documented, quantified, and legally adjudicated. The alphabet of betrayal had been translated into legal language, and justice had been served with the same methodical precision that Isabella had used to conduct her affair. Professional fallout. While I was navigating divorce proceedings, Isabella was discovering that conducting an affair with a vendor had professional implications that extended far beyond her personal life. The anonymous complaint to her company's HR department had triggered an internal investigation that was methodical and thorough. Corporate conflict of interest policies exist for good reasons, and Isabella's relationship with Roman created exactly the kind of ethical complications that companies work hard to avoid. Roman's company provided digital marketing services to several Chicago agencies, including occasional subcontracted work for Isabella's firm. The investigation revealed that Isabella had been involved in vendor selection processes that could have benefited Roman's company. While there was no evidence of direct financial impropriety, the appearance of conflict was sufficient to violate company ethics policies. More problematically, the investigation uncovered Isabella's pattern of charging personal expenses to company credit cards, then later reimbursing the firm when questioned about specific charges. The client dinners that were actually romantic meals with Roman. The business travel that was actually hotel meetings for personal purposes. Isabella's supervisor called her for a meeting on a Friday afternoon in late November, just 3 weeks after I had served her with divorce papers. "We've completed our review of the conflict of interest complaint," Isabella's supervisor explained, according to the termination documentation that later became part of our divorce proceedings. "While we found no evidence of direct financial impropriety, we did identify several violations of company ethics policies." Isabella was terminated for cause, which meant no severance package, no extended health insurance, and no positive reference for future employment. 12 years of career advancement were eliminated in a 30-minute meeting. The professional consequences cascaded quickly through Chicago's marketing community. Isabella's industry was relatively small and gossip-driven, and news of her termination for ethics violations spread rapidly through professional networks. Potential employers who might have been interested in Isabella's experience and client relationships were now cautious about hiring someone who had been terminated for vendor conflict issues. The professional reputation she had spent over a decade building was damaged, possibly irreparably. Meanwhile, Roman was discovering that his association with Isabella was also professionally toxic. Several Chicago marketing agencies quietly terminated their relationships with his company, not wanting to be associated with the conflict of interest situation that had destroyed Isabella's career. The romantic affair that had seemed so exciting when funded by my money and conducted in expensive hotels was now a professional liability that was damaging both of their careers. The passion that had justified destroying my marriage was apparently not strong enough to survive unemployment and professional ostracism. Victoria's surveillance reports during this period painted a picture of a relationship in rapid decline. Isabella and Roman's meetings became infrequent and brief. The expensive restaurants were replaced by coffee shops. The luxury hotels disappeared entirely. "They met twice last week," Victoria reported in early December. Both meetings lasted less than an hour, and both appeared to involve significant arguments. Mr. Castellano left both meetings abruptly. By mid-December, the relationship that had cost me my marriage and Isabella her career was effectively over. Roman had stopped responding to Isabella's calls and texts. His social media activity suggested he was already pursuing other romantic interests. Isabella was now unemployed, professionally damaged, financially limited by the asset freeze, and abandoned by the man she had risked everything to be with. The romantic fantasy that had justified 4 months of systematic deception had evaporated under the pressure of real-world consequences. I felt no sympathy for Isabella's professional difficulties. She had made calculated choices to violate both her marriage vows and her professional ethics. The consequences were natural and appropriate, flowing directly from her decisions rather than from any vindictive action on my part. The alphabet of betrayal had been written by Isabella's choices, but the professional epilogue was being written by the natural consequences of those choices. Justice was being served not through my intervention, but through the simple operation of cause and effect in both legal and professional contexts. Settlement and resolution. The divorce settlement was finalized on February 14th, Valentine's Day. The irony of the date wasn't lost on me, though I hadn't planned it. The court schedule had simply aligned to make our divorce final on the holiday, traditionally associated with romantic love. The final terms were even more favorable than the initial settlement offer. Isabella's deteriorating financial situation had reduced her negotiating leverage significantly. Without employment, with limited access to joint assets, and facing mounting legal fees, she was eager to conclude the proceedings quickly. The dissipation claim resulted in $11,400 being credited to me from our shared assets. full reimbursement for every dollar Isabella had spent on her affair. But the real victory was in the asset division itself. I retained ownership of our home, worth approximately $400,000, with $200,000 remaining on the mortgage. Isabella received her share of our other assets, but after the dissipation compensation and legal fees, her portion was substantially reduced. More significantly, Isabella was now responsible for her affair-related debts. The credit card charges that had initially been spread across our joint accounts were now entirely her obligation. The romantic weekend at the luxury resort, the expensive dinners, the gifts for Roman, all of it became Isabella's individual debt. "Your ex-wife is essentially starting over financially," Sarah Baker explained as we reviewed the final settlement documents. "Reduced assets, increased debt, no spousal support, and currently no income. It's going to be a difficult transition for her." I felt no guilt about Isabella's financial difficulties. She had made the choice to steal from our marriage to fund her affair. She had made the choice to violate professional ethics policies for personal relationships. She had made the choice to risk our shared financial security for temporary romantic excitement. The settlement was justice, not revenge. Every financial consequence Isabella faced was directly traceable to her own decisions and actions. I hadn't sabotaged her career, hadn't exposed her affair publicly, hadn't engaged in any vindictive behavior. I had simply documented her choices and allowed the legal system to impose appropriate consequences. 6 months after finalizing the divorce, I learned through mutual friends that Isabella had moved to Denver, starting over in a new city where her professional reputation wasn't damaged by the Chicago marketing community's knowledge of her ethics violations. Roman, meanwhile, had also left Chicago, reportedly moving to Milwaukee, where his business connections weren't tainted by association with Isabella's conflict of interest problems. The great love affair that had justified destroying my marriage had lasted approximately 8 months from beginning to end, with the final 4 months consisting primarily of professional and financial consequences rather than romantic passion. As for me, the settlement left me in a stronger financial position than I had been during the marriage. The house was mine, free of any claims from Isabella. My individual retirement accounts and investments remained intact. The dissipation compensation had essentially recovered all the money Isabella had stolen from our joint accounts. More importantly, I was free of the exhausting burden of living with someone who was systematically deceiving me. The stress of the investigation and divorce proceedings had been intense but temporary. The stress of being married to someone who was lying about her whereabouts, her activities, and her feelings had been constant and corrosive. I realized that I hadn't been truly relaxed or happy in months before discovering the affair. Isabella's deception had created a background tension in our marriage that I had attributed to work stress or normal relationship evolution. In reality, I had been subconsciously aware that something was wrong, even when I couldn't identify what it was. Living alone in our house, now my house, was initially strange but quickly became liberating. I could trust my environment completely. I knew where I had been, what I had done, how I had spent my money. There were no mysteries, no inconsistencies, no need to carefully analyze every conversation for hidden meanings or potential deceptions. The alphabet of betrayal had taught me valuable lessons about trust, verification, and the importance of responding to deception with strategic rather than emotional thinking. Isabella's systematic lies had been met with systematic documentation and legal action. Her methodical betrayal had been answered with methodical justice. The final chapter of our marriage had been written not in passion or fury, but in precise legal language that quantified the cost of betrayal and assigned appropriate consequences. Sometimes the most effective revenge is simply allowing people to experience the natural results of their choices. New beginnings. 1 year after discovering Isabella's affair through her laptop's autocomplete function, I was sitting in my home office, the same room where I had made that discovery, reviewing the final documentation from our divorce settlement. The methodical approach that had served me so well during the investigation and legal proceedings had also guided my recovery and rebuilding process. My career had actually benefited from the focused energy I had poured into work during the divorce proceedings. The major system overhaul project I had been leading was completed ahead of schedule and under budget, earning recognition from senior management that resulted in a promotion and a substantial salary increase. The emotional weight of betrayal had been replaced by the satisfaction of justice served and life rebuilt according to my own preferences and values. I had learned to trust my analytical instincts in personal relationships the same way I trusted them in professional contexts. The therapy process that Sarah Baker had recommended had been invaluable, not for processing guilt or regret, but for understanding the psychological patterns that had made me vulnerable to sustained deception. I learned to recognize red flags earlier, to verify rather than simply trust, and to value consistency between words and actions. The key insight, my therapist, Dr. Reginald Hawkins, had explained, is that your analytical nature is an asset in relationships, not a liability. You were trained to trust but verify in professional contexts. The same principles apply to personal relationships. This lesson proved valuable when I began dating again, approximately 10 months after the divorce was finalized. I approached new relationships with the same methodical evaluation I used for complex technical problems, observing patterns, noting inconsistencies, and building trust gradually based on demonstrated reliability rather than stated intentions. The woman I eventually began seeing seriously was Dr. Amanda Wright, a forensic accountant I met through professional networking events. Amanda's work investigating financial fraud had given her insights into deception and integrity that complemented my own hard-earned wisdom about trust and verification. I investigate people who steal money from their employers, Amanda told me during one of our early dinner conversations. You investigated someone who stole money from your marriage. We both understand the importance of evidence over emotion. Our relationship developed slowly and transparently, with both of us understanding that trust had to be earned through consistent behavior rather than granted through romantic gesture. Amanda's calendar was open to me, her activities were verifiable, and her words consistently matched her actions. The contrast with my marriage to Isabella was stark. Where Isabella had been charming but secretive, Amanda was straightforward and transparent. Where Isabella had been dramatic and attention-seeking, Amanda was steady and reliable. Where Isabella had made promises about future behavior, Amanda demonstrated present integrity. 18 months after my divorce was finalized, I received an unexpected email from Isabella. She had found my professional email address and was reaching out to apologize and explain her behavior during our marriage. The email was lengthy and emotional, describing her affair as a mistake that had spiraled out of control, expressing regret for the pain she had caused, and suggesting that perhaps we could maintain some kind of friendship for the sake of our shared history. I read the email once, then deleted it without responding. Isabella's attempt to rewrite history by characterizing her methodical, 4-month affair as a mistake was as dishonest as her original deception. More importantly, I had no interest in maintaining any connection to someone who had demonstrated such a complete willingness to lie and steal. The alphabet of betrayal had taught me that some actions create consequences that cannot be undone by apologies or explanations. Isabella had chosen to destroy our marriage through systematic deception and financial theft. Those choices had natural and appropriate consequences that she would have to live with permanently. 2 years after discovering the affair, I was promoted to Chief Technology Officer at my firm, a position that came with significant increases in both salary and equity. The focused energy that I had channeled into work during the divorce proceedings had accelerated my career advancement beyond what would have been possible while managing a deceptive marriage. Amanda and I had moved in together, sharing my house with an ease and comfort that I had never experienced with Isabella. Our relationship was built on demonstrated trust rather than assumed trust, on verified compatibility rather than hoped-for compatibility. "You know what I appreciate most about you?" Amanda asked one evening as we sat in the living room, where I had once pretended to watch television while planning my legal strategy against Isabella. "What's that?" "You're exactly who you appear to be. There are no hidden agendas, no secret behaviors, no gap between what you say and what you do. That kind of integrity is rare." I reflected on her comment later that evening. The methodical approach that had allowed me to document Isabella's betrayal and pursue appropriate legal consequences had also taught me the value of being equally methodical about honesty and integrity in my own life. The alphabet of betrayal had been a painful education, but it had ultimately made me a better partner, a more successful professional, and a wiser person. Isabella's deception had forced me to develop skills and insights that served me well in every aspect of my life. Sometimes the most devastating betrayals become the foundation for the most significant personal growth. Isabella had intended to deceive me, steal from me, and then presumably continue our marriage while conducting her affair indefinitely. Instead, her betrayal had freed me from a fundamentally dishonest relationship and taught me how to build something better. The final lesson of the alphabet of betrayal was this: trust but verify, document everything, and never let emotion override strategic thinking. Isabella had gambled that I would never discover her affair, or that if I did, I would forgive her rather than pursue consequences. She had been wrong on both counts. The man who had discovered his wife's affair through autocomplete suggestions had evolved into someone who understood that the best revenge isn't emotional or dramatic. It's methodical, legal, and permanent. Isabella had written the alphabet of betrayal, but I had written the epilogue, and I was living it well.